Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody joining us both here in person and online. We are live at the Water Pavilion at COP26, and I am very proud and pleased to be introducing our next panel, which is very, very distinguished. The theme of the panel is around shaping the water management global agenda, the value of ESG data for the private sector. And for those of you uninitiated, ESG means environmental, social, and governance. And it's a term used ubiquitously within and across the financial sector to mean and capture all of the things that we within the water community and the climate community hold so dear. There may well be a number of acronyms thrown out throughout this panel today, and I would ask our panelists to please bear that in mind when you're talking through the content. My name is Kate Lamb. I am the Global Director of Water Security at CDP, and Kata has very kindly asked me to provide a couple of minutes an opening statement on why we're here today ultimately and why we're focusing on this topic within the Water Pavilion, and how this is influencing or potentially going to influence the outcomes of COP26 and beyond. So I've been working incredibly closely with Jennifer Jun at CWE and James Dalton at IUCN and a whole range of other partners on developing this water pavilion. It's the first time we've ever had one. In previous COPs, we have had one distinct water event that lasted maybe 2.5, 3 hours, focused on water, that, if I'm being honest, was a water conference within a climate change conference. And it generally would rarely break through into the mainstream. And that's why we decided this year that we needed to do better and that we can do better. And we took the rather bold and probably brave decision to move ahead with having a pavilion. And the importance of this is that we're now able to host 180 different sessions across the entire 2 weeks, providing this hugely important drumbeat of noise, water-related noise, that everybody walking around us is directly or indirectly picking up by osmosis and directly by joining us today. Walking around this platform and this room are also the negotiators, vitally, those that are responsible for negotiating the text that governments are currently working on to set their ambitious outcomes for climate change this year. And so this is the place to be, and we're really very proud to have you all presenting, particularly those from the private sector whose voices, and invariably on water, not always been elevated as strongly as we know it can be. So the key initiatives that are really going to help address these issues and allow the private sector to play its part are, of course, one of those that's close to my heart, which is transparency, we focused on earlier. As we heard in the panel just a moment ago, having real important business relevant data reported in a consistent, comparable way every year by corporations is the foundation of more meaningful, informed decision making by financial institutions themselves. And ESG service providers such as that which Kata represents today play a fundamental role in enabling that more informed decision making to take place. They take the data, for example, that CDP provides and turn it into insights and actionable insights and intelligence that financial institutions then act upon. And so it's really exciting to be able to introduce Kata. I'm going to stop there, Kata. Kata is the water thematic expert at Sustainalytics. It's owned by Morningstar. And Kata will introduce the rest of our panel and lead you through the discussion this afternoon. So Kata, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kate, for your words, very concise summary, and thank you for your dedication and sort of creating the opportunity for all of us to be here today. Hello, everyone. Those of you physically in the Water and Climate Pavilion right now in Glasgow in the Blue Zone, and also those of you joining us virtually as well. As Kate said, my name is Kata Molnar, and I'm working as the water thematic expert at Sustainalytics, and it's really my pleasure to welcome you all to our session today. This event is going to focus on really the value of environmental, social, and governance data in shaping the water management agenda. And our panel discussion that will start very soon is going to address the relevance of water within these environmental, social, and governance issues, water disclosure, and finally talk about sort of the theory of change behind having and using this data for a force for good. For those of you unfamiliar with Sustainalytics, we are a Morningstar company and the leading global provider of these ESG research ratings and data. We serve more than 900 of the world's leading asset owners and asset managers who incorporate this information into their investment processes. And we offer a wide range of solutions, including risk and impact research, compliance and screening to the EU Action Plan, as well as stewardship services. So I believe Sustainalytics is a rather new participant to an event like COP26, but I believe it perhaps signals that newer stakeholders are acknowledging that the stakes are really high, and water is absolutely vital to life. COVID-19 really proved that over the past 2 years. Yet with half of the world's population expected to be living in water-stressed regions by 2050, it really still remains an undervalued, over-allocated, utterly polluted resource at the global scale to which equitable access is still not assured. So we are here today because we believe we need to revolutionize the way we manage water, the way we strategically think about water, as well as how we report and make investment decisions on this finite resource. And we need to do this together. So with that, I'd like to turn to our distinguished panel. Let me introduce our speakers today. First and foremost, Aidan Davey, who's the Chief Operating Officer and Director of the Environmental Program of ICMM, which stands for the International Council on Mining and Metals. Welcome, Aidan. And Ravi Abeyvardana, Technical Director of the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, CDSB. So I welcome you both, and we will start with our first question around the relevance of water. So Aidan, would you like to give us a bit of an overview of your work and the importance of water for mining companies? You have a really large member base with the largest mining and metals companies in the world, and they have committed to a goal of net zero emissions aligned with the Paris Agreement, and also they promote delivering on the SDGs. So it would be very interesting for us to hear from you about the prominence of water, and also what weight do you give in your work to this issue when you engage with your members?
Thanks, Kata. And I think we probably all recognize the reality that humanity will not be able to meet the sustainable development challenges of this century or beyond without improving the stewardship of global water resources. Last year, the UN's World Development Report focused on the nexus between water and climate change, so it's very topical to mention this in the context of COP26. It reported on how climate change is going to affect not just the availability, but also the quality and the quantity of water that's available for basic human needs, and is going to threaten really the enjoyment of human rights to water and sanitation for billions of people. Water insecurity was also the subject of a major World Resources Institute report last year on ending conflicts over water. So water availability is a growing global challenge across countries, industry sectors, and society, and the mining and metals industry is one of those industry sectors. Substantial water-related risks are becoming more immediate and significant, and they've got the potential to have adverse consequences for all users of water, and I include within that communities, nature, as well as business. So the integration of water risk into corporate strategies is going to become a central facet of broader sustainability and climate strategies for the industry. Our industry, mining and metals, we're highly dependent on water for our operations. And as an industry, I think we've got a leading role to play in contributing practical solutions to water resource challenges. Water has been a priority issue area for ICMM for some time, and I think our members have shown leadership in adopting a firm commitment to water stewardship. So back in January 2017, our members pledged action to support the responsible use of water through the launch of the position statement on water stewardship. And the commitments in that position statement are binding on ICMM members and requires them to apply strong and transparent water governance, including robust public reporting, to manage water at operations effectively and to collaborate to achieve responsible and sustainable water use. So I think that probably underscores the importance of water, not just as a global issue, but as an issue for our members and as part of the membership proposition of ICMM members.
Thank you so much. That was a great overview to get to know a little bit your work and your membership. We will definitely get back to some of the points you mentioned just now. So I'd like to give the floor to Ravi and discuss the fact that quantifying water and related risks and opportunities in investment decisions is quite a huge challenge still. And so from our perspective, we see that the reason is partially that existing reporting frameworks underrepresent water and associated metrics are still missing, and existing disclosure is mostly voluntary. So I would like to hear from Ravi. Ravi, what does the current water reporting landscape look like in a regional perspective? And then we could talk about your water application guidance and how that supports creating more consistent water reporting that you've recently launched.
Thank you ever so much, Kata. And just excuse any noise in the background because I'm dialing in directly from COP26 and the energy here is really fantastic. So to address your question, I think it's very clear that water and water-related disclosures are just not as developed as we have for climate. And climate really has received a groundswell, primarily because of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and the recommendations which were set out back in 2017, and the uptake via different jurisdictions in this climate approach. However, there is greater awareness by investors and also the business community between sustainability topics such as climate and water and other relevant matters which pose a financial risk to the actual underlying business itself. And larger and mainstream investors are increasingly integrating sustainability information such as water into their investment decisions and calling for improved disclosures. And as you had mentioned a moment ago, Kata, Cdsb very much looks to plug that gap. So, and the Cdsb water guidance, so an application of the Cdsb framework, which looks to actually help preparers implement decision useful information into their mainstream financial report. And the water application goes about assisting preparers doing just that, integrating water into their mainstream financial report, embedding it into governance and risk management, because water and water scarcity and the other water related matters do pose a business risk to business operations, just like climate does. And what this water application guidance provides preparers is ultimately that guidance around how to embed it into governance, risk management, and the other pillars mentioned by TCFD, such as around strategy. What is the strategy to actually mitigate this risk? And link this, most importantly, back to the back half where the financial statements are. If you've made a commitment on water, what is that investment and how is it reported into the financials? And are there any potential impairments on assets on the balance sheet? So hopefully that provides some clarity, Kata.
Definitely. And I really like this expression, decision useful information. I think that's what we all are looking for. But as a follow-up to you, Ravi, and turning a lens more onto discussing on disclosure and specifically, we see also in our research, our in-depth research coverage of about 4,000 or 5,000 companies that public reporting on key water metrics is really missing, both reporting on a site level and the corporate level and also at the supply chain level. So that's very problematic if you want to understand your exposure to these risks, right? So, and of course, into impact and sort of to understand the broader water journey that a company is on. So could you elaborate a bit more about the components that a corporate water reporting should include according to your application guidance? And maybe we could talk about two different things here. First, about how to measure water-related materiality adequately, and secondly, how to set the right management responses at the right scale, as I said, from own operations, facility level, up to supply chain level.
Yeah, of course. And I think it's useful to actually have a distinction with climate here, for example. Climate is very much global. It doesn't really have any boundaries, country boundaries in that sense, whereas water very much is location specific. And what Cdsb has done is research on the EU biggest companies, which showed that the majority of companies included water metrics within their annual reports. However, they generally were lacking the contextual information, so that the location-specific nature to water-related risks. So where in your supply chain are these water-related risks? How is the company going to go about addressing these water-related risks? Does it pose any financial implications on the assets which are held on your balance sheet? So are there any processing units which are operated by the company, and are there any chances of a potential impairment, for example? So that sort of thinking and application of such thinking within the mainstream financial report. So that's number one. And then number two is a description of the materiality process. So how has a company gone about ascertaining whether water is a material risk for that particular entity? And when it comes to materiality assessments, it really does go back into that contextual perspective, understanding the local situation, understanding the stakeholders who are playing in that particular jurisdiction or in that particular location, and really figuring out whether water is a material issue for that particular business. And if it is, how do they go about communicating that in a clear and consistent manner within their mainstream financial report to their investors, so that investors have a clear understanding of the material issues which are playing out at an entity level?
Sure. Would you like to add anything on the management side as well?
Yeah, of course. So from a management perspective, all of this starts from management. So very much the governance around this. So it's very clear that management processes need to be put in place, and a description of those management processes, the targets which management has set to actually mitigate some of these water-related risks, and what are the actual controls put in place to actually monitor progress year on year. Ultimately, the information which falls into the mainstream financial report should be verified by a third-party auditor. And from my personal perspective, this is a material financial issue. It should form part of the actual mainstream audit, which is signed off on an annual basis alongside your financials.
Thank you so much. And on that point, I'd love to hear Aidan's perspective. I couldn't agree more. This is definitely an area we are also looking to develop further in our research. Aidan, do you have any immediate response to what just Ravi said?
I agree with so much of what Ravi just said. Maybe just on that last point about it being a material issue, and therefore it's something that ought to be reported and assured. I think on balance, I think that is probably the case. I think there can be instances where, for some companies, because of the geographies they operate within, because they may operate in water abundant environments, it may be less material for them than for others. But again, part of the work we expect member companies to do is not just to report annually on their performance, but also to have that reported information subject to an assurance undertaking. And quite often and increasingly, we see members selecting water as one of the performance areas that are subject to third-party assurance.
I'd like to follow up on the actual business model or industry-led risks and talk a bit more about the mining industry, if you don't mind, Aidan, because we see that sector-specific guidelines and benchmarking can be really a powerful tool to catalyze targeted and measurable change on the ground. And we do see some benchmarking happening led by Ceres, for example, on the agriculture food sector. They just launched their 4th report, Feeding Ourselves Thirsty. We proudly contributed to actually on our side. So I'd be curious to hear because we see ICMM has a really strong and comprehensive water stewardship framework and a position paper that you just mentioned earlier. And so could you share a bit about how these specific water-related guidelines facilitate better transparency and water management for mining companies? But I'd also love to hear if you are potentially in a position to work more towards benchmarking your companies that you are actually doing in a really cutting edge way regarding health and safety, for example, another really important issue for the industry.
Thanks, Kata. So the water reporting guidance we released in August of this year, that does facilitate much greater transparency around the water management practices of our member companies, because it's a requirement of membership. So one of the commitments in the position statement I mentioned earlier on water stewardship that we put out in early 2017 is for members to publicly report their water performance, material risks, opportunities, and management response using consistent industry metrics and recognized approaches. So this updated guidance supports members to achieve this by specifying the minimum reporting commitments for member companies, to promote transparency through consistent reporting. And those minimum reporting commitments are structured in such a way that they provide an overview narrative supported by consistent metrics in a way that describes a company's water interactions, the risks and opportunities related to water, and then the management response, which I think very closely mirrors to what Ravi mentioned earlier. And importantly, the narratives on water interactions, which cover your activities, the water sources you use, consumptive uses and discharges, that allows the context and the meaning of the associated metrics to be clearly articulated, recognizing that the magnitude and significance of those metrics will vary both year on year, but also between companies and operating sites. The water risks and opportunities narrative focuses on materiality, and it covers aspects such as the importance of water to the business, associated risks, the prevalence of operating in water-stressed environments, and material non-compliances that companies have had in the past year. And then the management response covers aspects such as integrating water into your business strategy and leadership, commitments to water stewardship, and risk management. And so the metrics that we put together, and again, all of this is public domain material, so it's as accessible to non-members as members to use. They're aligned with other sources of water reporting guidance, such as the CEO Water Mandate Corporate Water Disclosure Guidelines and the Global Reporting Initiative's Water Reporting Standard. On the question of benchmarking, we've currently got no plans to benchmark member companies in this area. However, all of the quantitative disclosures, and indeed the qualitative disclosures, and on the quantitative side, it includes things such as operational water withdrawals by source and quality, other managed water withdrawals, total discharges by destination and by quality, and reuse and recycled volumes. They're all based on consistent and comparable metrics that members will need to make publicly available either on their website or in their sustainability reports or in a corporate report. That data is currently, we ask that it be aggregated for all sites, but that there be a separate reporting out for all of your sites that are classified as being in water-stressed areas. So while ICMM won't be doing benchmarking, having consistent and comparable data for our member companies, and indeed for non-members that adopt the guidance, will really support consistent reporting and therefore comparabilities for anyone that is interested to do benchmarking.
Definitely, I believe that building on existing frameworks and standards reporting frameworks are helping companies having less burdened by their reporting obligations. And I believe, Ravi, your water application guidance also builds on this similar approach. that you are not actually reinventing the wheel, you are not proposing anything new, but you are actually building on existing reporting frameworks and aggregating those.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important with regards to where we are at the moment that I was once a preparer. So a year or two ago, I was in that preparer situation, and clarity really is required with regards to what framework should a company use, and there's lots of them. It's often referred to as the alphabet soup of frameworks. So, but ultimately, what we've tried to do here is just declutter. Cdsb is well known for just doing a building blocks approach. There's no point reinventing the wheel. Where appropriate, we cross-refer within the actual water application guidance to the Global Reporting Initiative, which Aidan had mentioned a moment ago, or other initiatives who are real leaders in this space. But the ultimate aim is to just ensure that information for investors it is reported in a clear and consistent manner. So important, and I guess this clarity will be provided, over time, where there'll be a maturity in thinking and a convergence in standards going forward.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And now turning to sort of our last round of questions about really how we are moving the needle here, how we are generating real world change here. It's a question basically to both of you. What do you think might be needed to trigger similar response within the finance sector? Once we have the data, once we have more transparency, what do we need for water that what we have for climate as a TCFD, for example, to not just not cause harm, but to work towards solutions and solving the water crisis that we are facing today? I don't know, Ravi, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, of course. So I do think part of the solution is a convergence in some of this thinking. Really important, and hopefully more clarity will be provided tomorrow in the session, which will be more clarity will be provided by the IFRS on their international sustainability standards, and hopefully a convergence in this space, so that when it comes to investor grade financial information reported by an organization, how can clarity be provided via one form of the standard rather than multiple standards? Because it can be really confusing when you start to aggregate up, and to support issuers and investors to do this work going forward. In the interim, they should just use what's already out there in front of them. And the Cdsb water application guidance, which was released a couple of months ago, is one of the most contemporary examples, which consolidates a lot of material to support a preparer in disclosing such information within their mainstream financial report. And I guess a lot of this will revolve around education. These are new concepts, right? For many businesses have been focused on climate, rightly so, but a lot of education is required in trying to get the business and management focused on decision useful information within their mainstream report, and that takes time. And my suggestion is start now and start having these conversations internally. Educate your management, educate the actual people who are going to be going down your value chain and doing the necessary work to actually make sure that you can do a materiality assessment. And it's to ensure that when it comes to mainstream financial reports, which include water, it should not be a checklist exercise. There needs to be serious thinking with it at a management level, and the actual integration of such thinking within the business and communicated clearly within the actual financial report, therefore. And as I mentioned earlier, there are nuances from climate. And when it comes to water, there should be a clear distinction with regards to where the water risks are. So whereabouts in your value chain are they? What type of risks is the business faced by? What are the actual mitigation plans? What are the targets? And how is the company actually going about this? And how is this verified? So water is very unique and will require a lot of stakeholder engagement. So just start now is my suggestion, because we're running out of time.
Thank you, Ravi. You really make a good point there. And I would just add maybe a keyword of public disclosure, that we really need also governments to be on board to enact and enable mandatory disclosure in this space. Aidan, as a last question to you, when we talk about real world change, given that our research also shows that even companies that comply with regulations and have strong management programs in place, they still, incidents and controversies still happen. So even for mining companies, that can mean, serious pollution, contamination, human rights violations of local communities near mine sites. Can you talk to us about how you approach controversies and how you engage with your members that are clearly committed to the guidelines, strong guidelines that you already mentioned?
Sure. Well, look, I think firstly, it's worth noting that some investors have started to question the value of controversy scores by rating agencies. I think largely because they are by their nature retrospective, and because some rating agencies don't really have sunset clauses on controversies, irrespective of how much either a company's management or practices may have changed since a controversy originally emerged. But it's a critically important issue. And I think it's really important to distinguish between controversies that arise from incidents where adverse harms are proven and incontrovertible, as opposed to controversies where a company may be subject to allegations that are unproven and in some instances may prove to be unfounded. So I think where those harms are proven, we expect our members to take steps to address them consistent with their commitments of memberships. And in rare instances where they point to potentially deeper concerns across the industry, such as the tragic tailings dam failure at Brumadinho in early 2019, we co-convened a global process alongside PRI and UNEP that led to the development of a global industry standard on tailings management to try and move practice forward across the sector as a whole. But I think one basic principle in dealing with allegations that may give rise to controversies that companies have caused harm to local communities is that the closer an avenue of redress is to the point of adverse impact, the timelier and more effective the remedy is likely to be. And conversely, the further away the means of accessing justice is from where the harms occurred, the more protracted the pursuit of remedy becomes, and often the more remote the prospect of a positive outcome. And the most local means of access to remedy, especially in remote areas, will often be through company-led grievance mechanisms. I must say, these are not a substitute for other forms of non-judicial or judicial remedy, but if they're well designed in a manner that creates trust among local communities, they've got the potential to provide effective remedy for a whole range of environmental and social harms. And that's why a condition of ICMM membership is that members have to establish effective grievance mechanisms at the operational level that are aligned with the principles for effective grievance mechanisms of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. I think that's a critically important foundational principle for addressing those concerns.
Thank you so much for explaining. And on our side, we definitely, I can confirm, we close the cases if both operational legally are settled, but we also see that the severity and the size of incidents are also critically important, which can show patterns of history of mismanagement occurring within the company. So those are important points. But we are getting close to the end of our session. Just one closing word I'd like to give it back to both of you, and then we are wrapping up here quickly. Aidan, Ravi, one last word.
Very brief word from me. One is that this old phrase that data speak for themselves, it's just not the case. Data plus insight is what really, or data plus narrative is what really gives you insight. So I think that's really important, and that's where the rating agencies have a critically important role to play. But even more important, investors need to integrate this into the decision-making process and take water performance seriously.
Ravi, last word.
Yeah, of course, be bold. There's no be bold and, own your message. It's really important, and start now, because it takes time to actually, think through and report in a very clear and consistent manner, and and get help wherever possible. Don't do this alone.
Thank you so much for Aidan and Ravi for participating. I thank also for our audience to join us. Water is a material risk. Its mandatory public disclosure is really emerging, and its management is key to meet our global targets. Thank you so much for joining us. And for more information, please visit our website. Thank you and goodbye. Have a good afternoon.